Well, happy Thursday in the new year. Greg Bishop here. It's Bishop on Air, streaming on YouTube, X, Facebook. I got to see if there's any other channels. Should I do TikTok? I don't know. I'll ask people jumping in here. Even if it's just to do clips of the show. I've been debating that with my wife on whether or not I should join TikTok. But good morning. Hello from Central Illinois, from the Peoria area. People checking in the live chat, where we're at each and every weekday morning at about this time. Thanks for hanging out with me in my home. It's good to do a talk show after being on terrestrial radio for like 15, 16 years or something. And seeing the progression of where things are headed. And hey, work smarter, not harder, right? So appreciate all the support and you guys being here. Tons to get to. Of course, we've got to take a look at some of the latest in litigation of the state's gun ban and registry. You've got the attorney Thomas DeVore cases that were in Effingham County Court yesterday. We'll get a brief update on that, but also delve a bit more into some of the arguments there. Plus, JCAR, gonna hear some more about this January 16th, but Madison County Record has an interesting story reviewing some of the questions and the answers about the ban that JCAR got from state police. We'll also have to get into the latest conversation about the migrant situation here in the state of Illinois. Thousands of miles away from the southern U.S. border, but obviously we've got tens of thousands of migrants that have come into Illinois because of its sanctuary city and state status. So we'll touch on that. Plus, we got to talk about population and crime. Ted Dabrowski from WirePoints is going to join us live at the 8 o'clock segment, so stay tuned for that. Also, the latest in the Epstein list. And this is fascinating just to see at least what kind of Illinois connection there may be. And got to jump a couple of, people to get some weird connections, but some fascinating stuff in those documents as part of a defamation case in the Ghislaine Maxwell Giuffre Virginia Giuffre case. So we'll look at that as well to a degree. Not going to do the deep dive into all of the names that are on that quote-unquote list, but we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So that's what we've got coming up here with Bishop on Air. All right. It's right here each and every weekday morning. Stay tuned. We'll talk a little bit about the arguments in the case that Tom DeVore's brought, seeking to get it reinstated. And also some of what JCAR heard in questions and answers about the gun ban. So stay tuned. That's on the way here with Bishop on Air. All right. Just a moment to reset. With that January 1st deadline come and gone, still lots of litigation in various venues challenging the state's gun and magazine ban and registry. Welcome back. It's Bishop on Air. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Support the program if you want with some merchandise below, at least on the YouTube link, or you can find me anywhere. Just go to bishoponair.com. Bishoponair.com. All right, let's kind of hear some of the arguments that are being made in the latest litigation against the state's gun and magazine ban back in state court. And we chatted with Tom DeVore yesterday, shared that with you, and he was in court seeking to reinstate his cases where he had over 7,000 temporary restraining orders in place because of the state's gun and magazine ban through much of last year, if you recall. So he was back in Effingham County Court where he made the arguments that the judge should reinstate the case because the case was ultimately vacated after the Illinois Supreme Court in the separate Dan Calkins case. They ruled against Dan Calkins, but Calkins was looking at things on a facial challenge, DeVore says, versus an as-applied challenge. Now, a facial challenge just says, on its face, this law is unconstitutional. An as-applied challenge says, as this law has been applied, it's unconstitutional. Both may have been talking about in state court the equal protections arguments with that underlying theme of the Second Amendment being absolute, but the equal protections arguments where you've got some people carved out that they don't have to comply with it. Other people do have to comply with it, even though they may be somewhat similarly situated, at least when it comes to training. So the training aspect here, saying that, police officers, retired police officers have certain levels of training, that, the National Guard members, they can use their firearms in the service of duty, security guards, prison wardens, they have training that is above and beyond what the typical person can get. That seems to be one argument, but it's not just the training aspect, it's also the classification. Somebody like a journalist is not a police officer. So they play different roles. And that's really the answer I got from Attorney General Kwame Raoul when I asked him after the Illinois Supreme Court heard the case. This was before the ruling on the case, but I remember asking Attorney General Kwame Raoul whether or not somebody like me or anybody really that's not a law enforcement officer, could they get the same type of training that others can get?
Back to the question of training, can I not get the same type of training that law enforcement can get, or security or wardens can get? Can I
Well, you play a different role, right? It's not just a question of training. You're not in a law enforcement role, I don't think.
So again, Attorney General Kwame Raoul saying that it's about the role people play. Well, when we talked with DeVore earlier this week, he essentially responded to that directly.
And in our case, the state of Illinois, the lawyers argued over and over that these exempt categories have training, specialized training in the exempt banned weapons. It's not true. It was a lie when they said it in the courtroom. It's a lie as we sit here today. And so even if you're willing to follow the precedent from this one federal case out of Connecticut, says it has to be a person who has been publicly charged to protect the public, and they have specialized training, then and only then is there a facial issue on a facial complaint. But we're arguing, again, as applied, that says the training doesn't lie with these exempt categories because they don't have any training in the exempt categories. We've proven that, at least enough to get past a motion to dismiss. And we have people that have just as much training as these prison wardens, being conceal and carry training, which is an equivalent of what they have. And again, the court cannot dismiss our case without us being allowed to get into the facts that we want to get into, because we're not making a facial challenge. And that is reversible error for the circuit court to say your case is over, you can't never win, because we're not making a facial challenge. That distinction is significant.
So again, that's Thomas DeVore, who yesterday was in Effingham County Courts. I was going to connect with him yesterday afternoon, but I just got a ton of news that piled up on me, some of which we're going to be unpacking in future segments here today. So stay tuned for that. But I did reach out this morning to DeVore and asked what an update was, just the upshot, and whether or not the judge took the case under advisement. And the judge took the case under advisement. So we will be watching that Effingham County case, in particular, if the judge is going to reverse his decision to vacate that set of cases and actually go through and recognize it as separate and unique from what the Illinois Supreme Court heard. So a lot more to come on that in the near future, no question. But there's other things going on, of course. Next week, you've got the Illinois Supreme Court coming into session. But the week after that, you've got the Illinois General Assembly coming back into session with the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules set to meet on January 16th. Why is that significant? Well, the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, they're that legislative oversight body that looks at how administrative rules get implemented. So when a bill passes the General Assembly, then the governor signs it, to execute the law, the executive branch then writes rules to execute the law. Then it goes back to the legislative branch as an oversight, the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, and they review these administrative rules to make sure that they're in line with what the intent of the bill they passed was. So it's kind of a check and balance, right? So different, processes for the rules being filed, but the rules for the gun ban registry were on an emergency basis, and they were filed September 15th for the October 1st opening. And it spelled out a whole bunch of things, definitions of what a, quote, assault weapon is, and an attachment, and the different outlines for the electronic endorsement affidavit with the window closing January 1st. So you had that emergency set of rules filed. Well, now JCAR has a second notice rule filing in front of them that they didn't take up before the January 1st deadline, but they're expected to take up those second notice rules January 16th. But Madison County Record, they have a story here that I want to overview with you, and that is headlined, Oversight Committee Raises Questions About Assault Weapons ahead of Monday's registration deadline. And then it goes through and it talks about as the new year begins, Governor J.B. Pritzker's ban on so-called assault weapons takes effect under emergency rules. A lot of unanswered questions. The Joint Committee on Legislative Rules, JCAR, that's the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, adopted emergency rules for Protecting Illinois Communities Act in September, but failed to adopt permanent rules or amend the emergency rules. Questions the committee asked State Police Director Brendan Kelly in November, and his answers capture their struggle to finish the job Pritzker and the legislature started. The committee's questions and Kelly's answers are listed below and condensed for clarity. So it just goes through a bunch of these different questions and how or if they're answered, right? I mean, for instance, let's say many gun clubs, security companies, and other organizations own items such subject to the affidavits. Typically, club presidents or local managers sign the firearms for them. Must an affidavit be updated when may change in leadership occurs? This issue may also impact collectors and museums. So you can see this, you really get into the minutia here, and it's important because, law-abiding gun owners want to be law-abiding. And when you have these really technical types of questions, does it allow for clear, definitive answers? Or does it just add to the confusion of all of this to where you've got people saying, listen, this is just unworkable. The Second Amendment says shall not be infringed, and these are all clearly infringements. So it goes on and lists all of these different questions. I would definitely encourage you to go check out the Madison County Record, where you just search the headline, Oversight Committee Raised Questions About Assault Weapons Ban Ahead of Monday's registration deadline, so you can see the latest there. So clearly a lot more to come. Of course, the Calkins case, you've got the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court going into conference. That's going to be tomorrow, and they're actually asking them to take up this case from the Illinois Supreme Court. So we'll see that if we get any kind of reports out tomorrow from the U.S. Supreme Court on their conference on that issue. But we've got all the mix of other cases as well, including the Fifth Amendment arguments in the Southern District of Illinois, which we've covered as well this week. With developments being the state must respond to the Fifth Amendment argument by January 19th, I think it was. But they have a January 12th date that they have to meet for a scheduling conference so they can start scheduling out when they're actually going to deal with the merits of this issue. So clearly a lot of big things going on. We will watch it all closely, and hopefully you'll be along for it as well here with Bishop on Air each and every weekday morning. All right, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Thank you so much for being here live to tape. All right, I'm doing all this switching and making things happen and, pulling up all kinds of stuff. So appreciate you guys letting me flex my talk show muscle each and every morning and giving me a healthy audience. So keep it up. All right, stay tuned. We got plenty more. Just subscribe and hit that notification bell with Bishop on Air. Well, Illinois is expanding non-citizen intake and shelters and food spending. It's the latest headline that we got yesterday from Governor J.B. Pritzker's office outlining all of the extra spending they're doing. It's based off $160 million that Governor J.B. Pritzker is spending from Illinois coffers, Illinois tax dollars, to help with the ongoing non-citizen migrant issue. So yesterday, we're waiting for news to drop, and of course, we get this statement from the governor's office essentially spelling out all of the extra spending, and at thecentersquare.com you can find this. Just search the Illinois page, and the state of Illinois opening a new intake center and shelter site to process the continued influx. An additional $2 million in food service contracts for shelters in Chicago are also being extended. Now, the plan comes as more than 60 buses came from Texas from December 20th to the 27th, nearly 2,500 new arrivals, and even buses dropping people off in places like Aurora and Elgin. But you also had a flight that came in from Texas to Rockford on New Year's weekend, 350 new arrivals there. So the facilities that they're setting up here include an intake center that's going to have 6 heated tents, a 220-person shelter located in Little Village at a former CVS in Chicago, and a temporary shelter at a Chicago hotel. Now, the governor said in a statement yesterday from his office, the state's determined to use its limited resources as efficiently as possible, helping asylum seekers seek shelter and settle in Illinois and achieve independence. We will continue to ensure that they meet and are met with dignity and compassion while we call for increased coordination and funding from the federal government to provide federal solution to the federal challenge. So, you know, we heard similar things from Mayor Brandon Johnson, who, you know, recently told CNN that they need more federal help, and in particular, that they need more federal resources. Here's Johnson from CNN. What was this past weekend, just before New Year's Day?
And I've asked for $15 billion for the entire country. I know I have a congressional delegation here in Illinois that has asked for $10 billion. Look, the technical support that we receive from the federal government, we appreciate that. Work authorization to put people on a pathway to sustainability, I certainly appreciate that. And without real significant investment from our federal government, it won't just be the city of Chicago that won't be able to maintain this mission. It's the entire country that is now at stake.
So again, the entire country's at stake, Johnson says. Well, when we chatted with former state senator Darren Bailey, who's running for Congress, he had this to say about the situation and the sentiments from the Democrats. He says is the type of leadership that leads to this type of problem.
That the Chicago, the very people that wanted sanctuary cities, wanted a sanctuary state, are now fearing, Brandon Johnson recently fearing for the future of our country because of this. And just recently, this weekend in Berwyn, Illinois, here's something else to consider. There was a 2-hour procession of semi-trucks flying Palestinian flags. And many of these trucks, there's video and there's pictures of them. Berwyn police, no one up there stopped them. They had 2 hours. Some people had to wait before they could get out on the highway with this procession going through. Where did these people come from? Are these people coming from, have they been coming across our borders for the last several years? So I do believe that the situation with our border is of utmost importance. It is priority number one.
So again, Bailey talking about how important this issue is, and you know, we'll obviously have to reach out to Mike Bost, who's the incumbent congressman that Darren Bailey's challenging in the Republican primary in March. But interesting to again just compare and contrast, right? Where you've got some in sanctuary cities saying that they need more federal funds. Brandon Johnson asking for $15 billion for the entire nation. But you've got this issue building up, and Brandon Johnson saying that this could be detrimental to the country. But others like, you know, conservative Republican Darren Bailey saying that the problem has been around for the past 3 years under President Biden's open border policy. And the reason it's compounding on sanctuary cities is because those areas, you know, Democrat-controlled areas, are allowing for policies to be in place that don't allow for local law enforcement to enforce federal immigration law. So clearly there's going to be a ton more to this, but the cost as well. It's not just the humanitarian issues, it's the overall cost. And for Illinois to date, state funds, the state spent around $478 million on shelter, food, medical care, rental assistance, wraparound and casework services. So a lot of funds being expended in all of this. And we'll obviously be touching on where this goes from here. And I know that in Congress, they're looking at starting impeachment inquiries into not just President Joe Biden for separate things, but also the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. So that clearly is something else that's going to be monitored as we progress throughout this saga. All right, so like, subscribe, follow along each and every weekday morning here with Bishop on Air. Appreciate you guys taking the time with me and hanging out. All right, coming back, we will talk with Ted Dabrowski. He is the president of WirePoints, and we'll talk about population and crime, in particular, what's happening in Chicago and what's happening with the state's population. Governor Pritzker's office yesterday dropping other news on us from the U.S. Census, so we'll get that for you here next with Bishop on Air. Hang out with me. Got to get Ted Dabrowski on live. It's one of the deals with being your own producer is you got to produce your show. So hang out with me, all right? Promise. We'll be right back with Ted Dabrowski. A lot of population news popping this week, and even before the new year, we had the latest annual population estimates from the U.S. Census showing Illinois in a decade of decline. And then we had, non-government reports from United Van Lines dropping this week, as well as U-Haul dropping a separate report this week showing Illinois losing population. But yesterday, Governor J.B. Pritzker's office announced that the U.S. Census has agreed to add an additional 46,000 people to Illinois' population. What's going on here? Let's take a moment to talk with Ted Dabrowski from WirePoints, who we're also going to chat with him about crime in Chicago, wrapping up in 2023, and what it looks like there. So, Ted, thanks for taking time with us this morning with Bishop on Air. So I guess break it down for us. What did you see in the governor's report yesterday on the U.S. Census?
Yeah, so, the governor's been working really hard trying to increase population in any way he can. He's denying the population crisis that Illinois has. And he got some good news apparently from the census, according to what he's reported. And they said that they found a whole bunch of places, I think, for elderly people, different settings where dormitories, where 47,000 people were undercounted in the last 2020 decennial census. So good news for him is that he's finding some more people The bad news is does nothing to change the trend that Illinois is in. We're losing people. We've been losing people for a long time, especially relative to the other states in the country. We just lost 250,000 more people the last 3 years, according to the census estimates. So it's good that he found 47,000 people, but it's been so bad, this population decline relative to other states, that we've lost congressional representation in a huge way. We used to have 27 congressmen. Now we have 17, and we're predicted to lose 2 more. So this big population shift, this migration between states, is having a massive impact on Illinois, its tax base, and its representation in Congress.
So does this at all change the trajectory of Illinois? Again, a decade of decline, and it looked like it was ramping up, right? I mean, year after year after year, it went from like 10,000 to all of a sudden over 107,000. Last year, those numbers were a bit softer, but still negative. But I have yet to get a clear answer from the U.S. Census if this new addition is added to that report that came out last month. So they're still getting to the bottom of that. They do confirm that they've agreed with several states on updating numbers, but whether or not those numbers were added to the softening of December's numbers, yet to get clear answers on that. But does this at all change that trajectory of Illinois losing population?
Greg, it does. I mean, if you look at just the last year alone, the census estimates where we lost again for the 3rd year in a row since that 2020 census. We lost 32,000. So maybe if he found 47,000, that makes up for last year's loss in population. But here's the big problem is, when you talk about the outmigration of people moving between states, look, Texas grew last year, right? We're talking about 47,000 found. Texas grew by 470,000 just last year. They grew by over 4 million people in the last decade. Florida, 2.8 million. That's what's happening, is that people are shifting and moving to those states, the big red states, and California, New York, and Illinois are taking the big hit. So that's what I'm saying. He can celebrate the 47,000 all he wants, but you look at the U-Haul data, you look at the United Van Lines data, you look at the IRS data, and people are clearly leaving Illinois in record numbers. Maybe 2023 was a slowdown. I don't know. You've got some migrants coming in, the international migrants coming in, so that's a bit of an offset. But the trend is horrible for Illinois.
Talking with Ted Dabrowski. He is the president of Wire Points here with us. And of course, you can catch us live each and every weekday morning with Bishop on Air. Ted, you guys have reports at Wire Points that breaks down kind of 2023 in the space of crime and violence in Chicago. Of course, a lot of headlines. Murders are down in Chicago. Crime's up, but murders are down when it comes to burglaries, robberies, and carjackings and things. Those are spiking. But I guess just kind of break down what you guys found in comparing Illinois' reduction in murders to really the rest of the country.
Yeah, and Greg, this is an important point too, because there's several big issues. This is an election year, of course. We got the DNC, the Democratic National Convention in 2024 in Chicago. So you're going to hear all kinds of spin, right? So, this is a big reason why we put out this data. And, we use government data. It's funny. They'll spin the government data one way. We'll try to show it to you the way we see it. Good news, if you want to call it good news, is that Illinois' murder rate, murders were down 13%. So that's about 92 fewer murders. And, everything else equal, that's good. The bad news is that, throughout the country, there were record drops in murders. So Chicago wasn't special. In fact, we're going to be for the 12th year in the row, Chicago is going to lead the country in the total number of homicides. So it's bad. It's bad. I mean, we are leading the country for 12 years in a row in homicides. And when you compare us to our big city peers, New York and LA, we have murder rates that are far, far higher than theirs. So we stand out. There's something wrong. And we've talked about it a lot, but there's something wrong with our approach to criminal justice and how we treat criminals, and it shows up in the numbers. So, and not only that, Greg, yes, homicides are down, but overall major crimes are up 16% this year, after being up 40% last year. So robberies are up, car thefts are way up, aggravated assaults are up, everything is up except for murders.
Ted Dabrowski with us from WirePoints. Of course, people can find the work that you guys do, and I'm flashing some of the graphics you put together based off of government data showing the comparison of Chicago to other major cities across the country. Clearly, there's going to be a lot more to be said about all of that, but what is the best path forward in your estimation to combat the violent crime in Chicago?
Well, there's a whole chain. We've talked about this a lot, where it's almost riskless to commit a crime in Illinois, in Chicago in particular, because you don't get arrested, you don't get prosecuted, and if you probably don't get sentenced. So you're just right back on the streets. There's a revolving door. So the first big thing, I think, is you got to show the backing of the police. If the police don't feel like they're protected, if they feel like they're the bad guys, then they're not going to do their job. And that's been a big problem under Lightfoot. Johnson hasn't been giving the strong support to police officers. And then two, so you have to have more arrests. Number two, you got to prosecute. And Kim Foxx, she's not running this year, so we're going to have a new district attorney. The question is, will we prosecute crimes? Kim Foxx has wanted to treat criminals like victims, and until that changes, the criminals are right back on the street again. And then we got to look at sentencing. We got to put these bad guys behind bars. If we don't, again, they know they can commit crimes over and over again. And that's what we have, is a revolving door. And these kids, many times kids, are right back on the streets the next day committing another crime.
Ted Dabrowski, WirePoints. Again, the website, wirepoints.org. Greatly appreciate you taking the time with us this morning. We'll connect again in the very near future, all right?
Thank you, Greg.
It is Bishop on Air. Again, thanks to Ted for joining us, and you can find his work and the work from WirePoints online, wirepoints.org, so make it happen, all right? Coming back, we got to get into the controversial issue of the latest release from Jeffrey Epstein's saga. And just a disclaimer here, all right? I mean, these are court documents that I was able to somewhat go through, talking almost 1,000 pages of PDFs. And it's a mix of things, lists of evidence, depositions, and the like. But one recognizable last name came up several times. No, I'm not talking about all the times Bill Clinton. No, I'm not talking about all the times that Prince Andrew's name was brought up, or Kevin Spacey's name was brought up. The last name that came up a couple of times, a Pritzker name. So stay tuned. We'll get to that next. Here with Bishop on Air. Trending on the internet is Epstein and some files that came out about the saga involving a defamation case between Virginia Giuffre and Ghislaine Maxwell, who was an associate of Jeffrey Epstein, who is dead. And of course, Epstein is known for having networks with very powerful people, and also being convicted of sex trafficking down in Florida, and then later being arrested and his house being essentially raided and a lot of evidence being taken out of the house, and then Jeffrey Epstein being found dead in a holding cell after being beaten up by somebody, and the coroners have ruled that homicide. But a lot of people have been, I guess, in a way, made aware of this story because of just how scandalous it is and some of the big names that come up in all of this. And there's a lot of names. All right, I'm not going to necessarily jump into all the instances that Bill Clinton's name was brought up, or Alan Dershowitz's name was brought up, or Kevin Spacey's name was brought up, or former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson's name was brought up. A whole bunch of people's names are brought up in these documents. Now, this is not the flight logs, and if you recall, those flight logs are still very much something people want to get their hands on. Why do they want flight logs? Because it shows who was on the plane with Jeffrey Epstein going to his private island, where it's believed there was sex trafficking going on with underage people. So clearly there's something going on here that's deeper and more sinister that people are going to be looking for. But the announcement of this release of documents, people assumed it would give a definitive list of people who took the plane, for instance. That's not the case. This really is just 1,000 pages of 40 different exhibits in a defamation case against Ghislaine Maxwell, filed by Virginia Giuffre, a victim of Epstein's trafficking. And in that, you do have some fascinating findings. And again, you can find this all over the internet, people posting the documents. I did go officially to the Pacer page and downloaded these documents and went through and did some keyword searches. But in one in particular, several documents pops up the name Pritzker. Not J.B. Pritzker, not the Illinois governor, but his cousin, Thomas Pritzker. So let's take a look here. If you follow me on X, just search Bishop on Air. You can connect with me that way. But here you can see in a deposition of Joanna Joberg that was released yesterday in the defamation case, Giuffre versus Maxwell. Joberg is asked if they had met several people, all right, and including Tom Pritzker. If you look at the deposition here, it says, did you meet Al Gore? No. Alan Dershowitz? No. Les Wexner? No. Tom Pritzker? No. Kevin Spacey? No. So, just a name being brought up does not in any way allay some kind of guilt, right? And these are all just depositions. This is not actual findings by a jury with charges that were presented. This is just a deposition, a lawyer sitting down and asking questions to somebody on the record and sworn in. So, a victim of Epstein's trafficking, saying that they hadn't met Al Gore, they hadn't met Alan Dershowitz, they hadn't met so-and-so, including they have not met Tom Pritzker. But if you look even further into other documents, and in particular, the deposition of Virginia Giuffre, she is asked specifically about the Tom Pritzker. And if you look again, follow me on Twitter, I did single this out. It goes on to have Giuffre explain that they feel like, they had this happen. I'd say, just reading this through, talks about, somebody else they had met, goes even further. I've met a lot of very high, powerful people, and I wasn't just introduced to them as who they are. It's only going back through photos and time to be able to realize who they are and what they are now, Giuffre said. So it's hard for me to distinguish who I've actually met and when and where I've met them. So the question from the attorney was, so to your knowledge, you've met one foreign president. To my knowledge, yes. And is there anything that might change your knowledge at a different time? She goes on to answer that question. All right. And then the attorney asks, all right, well, if I was to ask you the question, how many times you had relations with Tom Pritzker, do you know what that question means? I believe so. All right. The attorney asks. And what's the answer to that question? I believe I was with Tom once. So that's an interesting finding there in the documents. Now, this was something else that was brought up in a couple of different instances from a different deposition where you had attorneys asking about the owner of a large hotel chain, and that's some people jumping to the conclusion that is Tom Pritzker, and it asks, when did Ghislaine Maxwell send you to have sex with the owner of the large hotel chain? And somebody else, jumping in and asking the question again, where were you sent to have relations with the owner of a large hotel chain by Ghislaine Maxwell? So again, some of the questions being objected to, but it seems that several times. Here we go. This is fascinating too. Where did you have relations with the owner of a large hotel chain in France around the time of Naomi Campbell's birthday party? That's fascinating to see these types of questions come up in several, instances of a large hotel chain owner. So these are just, again, snapshots of depositions in a long case of defamation from Virginia Giuffre against Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine Maxwell serving time, but we don't necessarily have that definitive list of people who may be implicated in this. Now, I did go back into my archives and the work I do with the Center Square. I've been there since 2017, probably even 2014. Oh my gosh. So that's my full-time gig, right? And I remember back in 2019, Governor J.B. Pritzker was actually asked about Thomas Pritzker being named in this cloud of different names associated with Jeffrey Epstein. And again, this was back in 2019 when Tom Pritzker's name was first brought up. But now we see in these documents that were released yesterday, where there was smoke, at least according to the deposition, there was some illicit activity involving the relations of this individual and a person under the age. So here's Governor Pritzker back in 2019 being asked if Tom Pritzker should step down from his position in the large hotel operations.
Thomas Pritzker, who I believe, if I your family tree, is an older cousin of yours, he was implicated in the documents that came out over the weekend saying that he had solicited texts from
and again,
Jeffrey Epstein.
This is 2019.
As a member of the Pritzker family, would you call that he stepped down as CEO?
First of all, I was unaware if he knew Jeffrey Epstein at all, and as you know, I do not. At this moment, I just say that I think that justice needs to be pursued here. There, of course, were some terrible things that were alleged here that Jeffrey Epstein seems to have done. And so I hope that the justice system will pursue the allegations that were made to the fullest extent of the law and make sure that the victims get the justice that they deserve.
So again, Governor J.B. Pritzker being asked way back in 2019 about this. Now new documents have come out. Will he be asked the same question again if, Thomas Pritzker should be held accountable outside of, any kind of federal prosecution or criminal prosecution, but when it comes to being part of the hotel chain oversight and such. So clearly fascinating to see that. A lot of attention's on the files, but I hope people better understand at least what the files actually are, right? Because they're not necessarily something that is the end-all be-all of this story. There's going to be a lot more to be said about all of that. All right. Again, like, subscribe, follow along each and every weekday morning. Illinois focused here, right? I'm a State House reporter. I go to the Illinois State House. I track legislation. I report it out, and each and every weekday morning when they're in session, I'll be doing that. In the meantime, lots of other things going on, from the ongoing migrant situation to the gun ban litigation and other stories that may pop up. So if you want to get at least plugged in a bit into what's going on here in Illinois, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share it with your friends, all right? All I'm doing is I'm just putting out info. I'm not necessarily leaning one way or the other or any way. I'm just giving you guys what you, at least I think, you should know. All right, so have yourselves a wonderful rest of the day. Again, like, subscribe, and follow along, all right? bishoponair.com. Whew, well, that was a show. What do you guys think? By the way, quick poll. All right, those sticking around. It says I got 261 of you guys watching on all the different channels here. Several people in comments on YouTube said drop the background music. Quick poll. Yes or no? Should I drop the background music? Because I'll tell you, this is music that I made with my brothers in a basement several weeks ago. I dig it. It's just us jamming. But keep it. All right, music is good. Well, who else? No, keep it. Music's fine. You demand, like the music, keep it up. Like the music, no. Greg, you should ask Pritzker. Okay. Keep it. No. I like the tunes. It don't matter at all. It's your show, man. How libertarian of you. Keep the music doing great, Greg. And we may make some more music, too. I mean, I'm planning on going back down there and hanging out. So love the music. Keep it. All right. Thumbs up. I think that overwhelmingly the live audience digs it. All right. So those people out there telling me. Very humbling, guys. All right, Brett. It's not that type of music. All right. I mean, we do get into a little bit of genre mix, you know, with like a Western theme, Western feel, but that's particularly for the council corral. All right, guys, I got to get out of here and get on with the rest of my day. Appreciate all of you. Again, bishoponair.com. If you need to get more information about how to get a hold of me, you can do it there. bishoponair@gmail.com is the email address. I still got to sit down and figure out a way to do some live calls. I'd love to be able to bring in some live calls during certain segments. So have yourselves a wonderful rest of the day. I'm out of here. Bishop on Air everywhere.